Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into some profoundly important analysis of the Massa uprising. Think of it not just as, a page in history, but as a living case study, a crucible, where the universal challenges and strategic imperatives of resistance movements are really laid bare. Our sources don't just recount events, they act as a profound diagnostic tool, revealing not only what happened, but an incredibly detailed blueprint almost for future actions.
It's fascinating, actually, because our sources don't just ask what happened or why did it unfold that way. They also ask what could happen given new meticulously planned strategies. So we'll be looking at the multifaceted reasons for the uprising's outcome and some incredibly detailed, actionable approaches suggested for future actions. It really shifts the narrative from hindsight to foresight.
Precisely. And that's where the real value lies for you, our listener. This isn't merely about understanding a specific historical event. It's about grasping the intricate dynamics of protest and resistance movements, globally, offering those crucial aha moments about the critical roles of organization, communication, and even countertactics against powerful state apparatuses. So let's jump right in. Our primary source asks directly, why did the Massa uprising not lead to a revolution? We're aiming to answer just that by dissecting a combination of internal, external, and structural factors.
Indeed. Starting with the internal factors, our sources highlight several major impediments. First and foremost was the absolutely brutal and widespread repression. Just relentless. Security forces unleashed a torrent of violence, mass arrests, cutting off internet access, and imposing severe communication restrictions. This really, really hindered any attempt at better organization or just spreading the word effectively.
But isn't brutal repression almost a given in these situations? What specifically made it uniquely stifling here, beyond what we might expect, that it so effectively, shut down organization?
That's a great point. It's the pervasiveness and the intensity, I think, coupled with the sheer speed of the response. This pervasive security atmosphere, in turn, it instilled widespread fear and terror, really deep fear. The potential consequences, arrest, torture, the general climate, it deterred many from joining, understandably. Then there was the significant challenge of a lack of unified leadership. That was huge. Protests were scattered without a clear, organized structure to coordinate and guide them, which naturally just reduced the protesters' bargaining power. The core insight here, I think, is that fragmentation of leadership, demands organization, combined with that state brutality, proved to be like the Achilles heel for the uprising's internal strength. And while initial demands, for individual freedoms, gender equality were broadly resonant, our sources point out that the demands diversified over time. They lacked a clear, unifying central theme. This prevented some segments of society from fully aligning, from really getting behind it. Adding to this was the internal opposition's own disagreements, a lack of national consensus on strategies and tactics within the opposition itself, which negatively impacted the ability to, mobilize social forces effectively.
So a movement that started with this really clear catalyst found its internal cohesion just kind of eroding under pressure and, different priorities, it sounds like. Moving beyond these internal dynamics, how did outside influences play a role? Were there external factors that also contributed to the uprising not prevailing?
Absolutely. The sources discuss how economic sanctions and various pressures really exacerbated economic hardships for many ordinary citizens. This pushed them to prioritize basic needs like food and shelter over political engagement. It just diverted focus and energy away from activism. Additionally, the role of foreign actors is noted. Interventions by some foreign players created suspicion among certain protesters, and maybe more importantly, it gave the government a powerful pretext for intensified suppression, allowed them to frame the protests as externally driven, rather than reflecting genuine domestic grievances.
Yeah, that's a powerful narrative for a regime to employ, isn't it?
Sure.
To justify its crackdowns. Beyond these internal and external pressures, what about the foundational power dynamics within the state itself?
Right.
What structural factors did our sources identify as critical?
Right. This brings us to the very foundation of the regime's power. The Islamic Republic possesses an incredibly powerful and pervasive security apparatus, just massive. This robust structure swiftly identified and contained protests using all sorts of surveillance and intelligence tools, making it very, very difficult for movements to gain traction or sustain any kind of momentum.
And how is that sustained? Because maintaining such a powerful omnipresent apparatus must be incredibly resource intensive, right?
Yeah.
Especially when facing broad public discontent.
It is, and this is where the oil revenue comes in. It's crucial. Our sources explicitly state that a significant portion of these revenues, rather than being invested in, say, infrastructure or welfare, is diverted to maintain this vast security force. We're talking about the IRGC with over 250,000 official personnel, plus hundreds of thousands of Bosnian paramilitary forces. It's enormous. This consistent sort of self-sustaining funding ensures the regime has the means for relentless suppression. It effectively enables them to quash dissent and keep their rule going without really needing public support or even economic stability to fund their apparatus.
Okay, now this is where the strategy truly comes into play. This is really interesting. Our sources go beyond just identifying failures. They pinpoint specific weaknesses and suggest actionable solutions. Let's delve into what one source refers to as the three major and important reasons for the uprising's limited success and the proposed ways to overcome them.
Indeed. The first key weakness identified was the problem of non-universal demands. The issue was, basically, a lack of a singular overarching demand that could motivate maximum public participation, which led to a movement that was maybe a bit limited, a bit too specific in focus sometimes. The proposed solutions are quite clear. Conduct thorough studies to identify common demands with the broadest possible consensus. Create a unified discourse to frame diverse demands within a cohesive narrative. And emphasize fundamental human rights, freedom, justice, equality, things that can attract a wider demographic.
That seems like a fundamental strategic imperative for any movement seeking broad appeal.
Yeah.
But how challenging is it in practice to unify such diverse demands under a single banner, especially when people's individual grievances can be so varied? The real aha here for me is that a movement, no matter how passionate, risks diluting its power if it can't articulate that single compelling narrative that resonates with everyone, or almost everyone.
It is exceptionally challenging, you're right, but crucial. The second weakness was the lack of a unified leadership. We touched on this. The absence of a strong, organized leadership structure just meant a lack of coordination and planning. Chaos sometimes. To counter this, the sources suggest establishing leadership structures, like forming councils with representatives from diverse social groups for collective decision-making and guidance. They also recommend training activists, really practical training in nonviolent tactics, communication, organization, and leveraging social media for communication and organization, but, with great caution and strong security protocols.
Right. So not just a charismatic leader figure, but a system of leadership, a resilient communication network that can withstand immense pressure. And the third weakness, I imagine this one directly confronts the brutal state force we discussed earlier.
Precisely. The third weakness was simply the brutal suppression. The problem was the superior equipment, the modern tactics, the relentless violence from security forces, including those plainclothes agents, special units, besieged drones, surveillance, internet blackouts, which just effectively crushed protests. The solutions proposed here are developing nonviolent resistance through training in methods like strikes, sit-ins, civil campaigns, seeking international support, getting backing from human rights organizations and democratic governments to exert pressure, and establishing support networks for detainees and their families. That's absolutely crucial for morale and just practical help.
So what does this all mean for future movements then? Our sources lay out a compelling strategic framework, starting with some foundational assumptions about the current landscape that are incredibly stark, actually, but crucial for any actionable plan.
Yes, these assumptions are critical to understanding the proposed strategy. They don't mince words. First, the sources assume that the vast majority of the Iranian nation seeks a healthy, efficient, and democratic regime. That's the baseline desire. Second, they posit that all the elements necessary for a revolution to emerge currently exist in Iran, suggesting this underlying readiness, this potential. And third, and this is very important, the current government will absolutely not relinquish power easily. They will resort to any means, including brutality and crime, to maintain control.
Wow. Those are some stark realities to grapple with. So, given these incredibly challenging assumptions, what is the core strategic proposal that our sources put forward for movements operating under such immense pressure?
Indeed, with those realities firmly in mind, the sources argue that the most intelligent and effective strategy involves using peaceful methods with a measured, calculated element of force in specific, limited instances. The paradox here, and it's a tricky one, is to appear entirely peaceful and nonviolent to the public and the media, while simultaneously executing quick, surprising operations when absolutely necessary to achieve planned objectives.
Okay, this raises a really important question, though. How do you maintain that public image of peaceful resistance while also acknowledging the need for tactical, surprising actions? Isn't there an enormous risk that even these measured, calculated elements of force, no matter how limited, could be immediately exploited by the regime? They could easily use it to demonize the entire movement, justify even harsher crackdowns, and you'd lose public and international sympathy, wouldn't you? It's an incredibly high-wire act, isn't it? Imagine the immense discipline and, frankly, tactical genius required for activists to publicly maintain a completely peaceful image, even as small targeted disruptions are being executed elsewhere. It's a psychological tightrope walk for the movement, the public, even the international community.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. The source acknowledges this razor's edge. It suggests that purely violent methods give the totalitarian regime an immediate excuse for severe crackdown, leading to dwindling support. We've seen that. Yet purely nonviolent methods might fail to achieve critical goals against such a ruthless opponent. So it's about finding creative, ingenious solutions to this paradox. The idea is to hit them where they are vulnerable, maybe disoriented from the delays, before they can effectively organize their suppression efforts against the protesters.
That's a very granular, almost military-style tactical breakdown. Are there specific units within the security forces that require different approaches? Do the sources differentiate?
Yes, they do. The sources differentiate tactics against specific units, which is interesting. Plainclothes agents, for instance. They're often armed with pistols, operating alone or in pairs, maybe on motorcycles or foot. Their main role seems to be intelligence gathering, identifying hotspots, leaders, sometimes even inciting crowds to expose key individuals. So countering them requires different methods, maybe focused on counter-surveillance or exposing them. Motorcycle units are a bit different, usually 30, 40 strong, used for that rapid response and dispersal, very intimidating visually. But the source asserts, quite boldly, that hitting, stopping, and even seizing their equipment and spoils is easy for information dissemination, coordination, basic first aid, technical support. Everyone has a role. And crucially, providing robust training in leadership, organization, secure communications, first aid, human rights is essential to empower these groups to act autonomously, but also effectively as part of a larger whole.
Right, and to keep these movements going over the long haul, they need consistent resources, right? This isn't a one-day event, it's a marathon.
Exactly. Sustainable financial resources are vital. You can't run on passion alone indefinitely. This means establishing support funds, maybe selling products, seeking public donations, fostering that sense of collective ownership and support. Transparency is also key here. Regular financial reports and oversight mechanisms to prevent any misuse of funds, which builds trust internally and externally. The sources also emphasize developing diverse combat strategies, combining those peaceful and creative methods with more direct, disruptive approaches we discussed. Defining clear, short-term and long-term objectives with operational plans, not just reacting, but planning. And importantly, learning from successful international movements that have faced similar authoritarian challenges. There's a wealth of experience out there.
And protecting the people on the ground, the activists themselves. That must be a constant primary priority, surely, not an afterthought.
Absolutely. Protecting activists is non-negotiable for the longevity and, frankly, the morality of any movement. This involves creating robust support networks for detained activists and their families, legal aid, financial support, emotional support, providing training in digital security and identity protection to avoid identification and capture in the first place, and establishing secure physical locations for meetings and covert activities away from surveillance. It's a holistic approach to safeguarding the movement's most valuable asset, its people.
The sources also provide specific, really tactical approaches for organizing and sustaining street protests over time, emphasizing not just igniting them, which sometimes seems easier, but keeping the flame alive against overwhelming odds.
Indeed. Sustaining is the hard part. The requirements for sustained protests are clear. Prioritizing security for protesters, masks, protective gear, secure comms are baseline. Ensuring strong organization with clear task division so it doesn't descend into chaos under pressure. Maintaining effective coordination across decentralized groups, which is tricky, and building flexibility, the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances and regime responses. They won't stand still. Specific tactics include forming specialized teams, dedicated medical teams, legal support teams, media teams for documentation and coverage, and logistical teams for essentials like food and water.
So a multifaceted support structure that's almost like a shadow organization running in parallel to the visible protests. And where do these protests take place? And how do they avoid becoming easy targets, static targets?
Good question. The sources suggest choosing strategic location spots that are easily accessible for people to join, can accommodate large numbers, but are also somehow securable with limited access points for security forces if possible. They also advocate strongly for non-violent methods like sit-ins and marches, avoiding property damage, which can alienate potential supporters, and using common symbols and slogans to foster unity. Critically, establishing defensive front lines, using physical barriers where appropriate, and providing basic self-defense training are recommended purely to protect protesters from attack. International appeal is also a major component, widely disseminating news and images on social media and international platforms to gain support from human rights groups and foreign governments. Put pressure on the regime from outside. And the ultimate dynamic goal, as the sources put it, is holding the streets. Not necessarily occupying one spot forever, but maintaining presence. This involves constantly changing gathering locations to avoid detection and preemptive crackdowns. Employing those guerrilla tactics, we talked about disruption and evasion, small-scale actions. Creating rapid information networks to track security movements in real time. And crucially, enlisting local support people, providing refuge, supplies, information. Community involvement is key. It's a dynamic, adaptive strategy designed to outmaneuver a powerful reactive state apparatus, not by brute force, but by sheer ingenuity, persistence, and constant movement.
Wow. This deep dive has really laid bare the incredible complexity of social movements, hasn't it? From internal strife to external pressures and the raw power dynamics of state suppression. It's clear there's no single easy answer, no magic bullet, but our sources offer a meticulously thought out path forward, almost turning past challenges into a future blueprint. What truly resonates with you, what really stands out from this comprehensive analysis?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what truly resonates, I think, is how this analysis shifts the narrative. It moves away from seeing the outcome purely as failure and towards one of strategic learning and evolution. It's not if change is desired by many, the sources assume that, but how meticulously it must be planned, unifying that passion, that righteous anger with precise, adaptable tactics. The emphasis on adaptability and that really difficult paradox of resistance. The idea being both overtly peaceful for legitimacy and support, but also strategically agile, with limited, precise actions when necessary. It's a powerful reminder that revolutionary success isn't just about passion or numbers, but about meticulous planning, unified purpose, and constant innovation against, frankly, overwhelming odds. It's a transformation from merely protesting to strategically resisting.
Absolutely, a very different framing. And for you, our listener, this raises an important question, perhaps something to think about. How do these insights into the Massa uprising and the proposed solutions resonate with other historical or contemporary movements you might be familiar with? Think about that delicate balance between spontaneous eruption and long-term grinding organization, or the effectiveness and the risks of strategic nonviolence versus calculated disruptive action. What might be the hardest challenge for any future movement to truly overcome, given all the layers of strategy and counter-strategy we've discussed today? Something to mull over.